so privileged to introduce Melissa Dunphy, who, of course, composed the N400 Erasure songs and that will perform in May. I just want to give a brief bio and then I will let Melissa take over. Melissa was born in Australia and raised in an immigrant family, and she herself immigrated to the US in 2003 and has become an acclaimed composer specializing in vocal, political, and theatrical music. She first came to national attention in 2009 with her large-scale work, The Gonzales Cantata, when it was featured in the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, National Review, Fox News, and on MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show, where she called it the coolest thing you've ever seen on this show. Her commissions include works for the BBC Singers, Voces 8, Cantus, Mendelssohn Chorus, Seattle Pro Musica, Skylark, Experiments in Opera, and the Kennett Symphony. Dunphy is also a Barrymore Award-winning theater composer and sound designer, and served from 2014 to 2024 as Director of Music Composition for the National Puppetry Conference at the Eugene O'Neill Theater in Connecticut. Dunphy has a PhD in compositions from the University of Pennsylvania and a BM from Westchester University and is on faculty at Rutgers. She is president of the boards of directors for Wildflower Composers and Lyric Fest. Melissa and her husband Matt are also avid citizen archaeologists and co-hosts of the popular podcast The Bog House about their adventures in Philadelphia colonial archaeology. They are currently developing the Necessary Museum, which they hope to open in 2026 to showcase their local discoveries. So thank you so much and welcome, Melissa.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to chat to you about this piece and about my work. And thank you so much for programming this piece as well. You know, it's funny when you write a piece of music for a group like Cantus, you never know if you're writing a piece that will be performed once by the, eight incredible TTBB voices of Cantus and then never ever get a second hearing because it's so specific for that group. But I feel like, first of all, they did an incredible job sort of recording it and putting it out there. And very quickly afterward, I got an inquiry from someone who said, "Could you make an SATB version of this? Because we really want to sing it." So I guess I'll talk a little bit about the piece. Thank you, by the way, for the introduction. Well, I guess first of all, I should mention, as you can tell, I am not a native Philadelphian. My accent is not a typical Philadelphian accent. I grew up in Australia, and I didn't start composing until I was in my mid-20s. When I finished high school, I got great grades in math and science, and everyone, especially my parents, were like, "You should become a doctor." So I started med school and lasted about 9 months before I realized my heart wasn't in it. And it's the kind of job that you really do have to have a calling for, and shouldn't just do because your parents told you you should, and quit and spent all these years wandering the wilderness before I finally got an opportunity to write music for a theatrical play, Midsummer Night's Dream. And it was while I was writing music for that that I suddenly realized this is what I want to do with my life. I want to compose. So I came to America in 2003, in the middle of the Bush administration. And for me, as a composer, well, for me as a person, I should say, it sort of coincided with what I might call a kind of political awakening for me. I had been interested in politics in Australia, but it wasn't until I think I landed in America and I lovingly describe it as like watching the circus from the inside of the ring for the first time rather than from the far seats. And just was simultaneously fascinated and horrified. And also, there are so many things about America that I love. I chose to make America my home with all its warts and things that we can freely complain about thanks to the First Amendment. Knock on wood, it sticks around. There were just so many things that I hadn't thought deeply about before as an Australian that I was suddenly sort of thrust into the middle of as an immigrant. And I feel like I did what a lot of American immigrants do in some ways, which is, it's almost like become more American than Americans. I immediately started writing music about the American experience as a way, I think, of grappling with what it meant and what it entailed, and how do I emotionally process this, what's going on around me, and how do I discover the motivations and understand America better. I don't know if I've quite gotten to like understanding America completely, but it is a good way, I think, of expressing myself and trying to understand what that's about. So I started writing music about politics very early on in undergrad, and I remember one of my professors gave very well-meaning advice. He said, be really careful if you're going to be writing about these political, potentially controversial topics, because you might alienate people who don't agree with you, and you might date your works to a particular moment in time. And then when that moment passes, the work that you wrote won't be relevant anymore. And I'm very thankful in many ways to, arrogant 20-something-year-old me that I chose to entirely ignore that advice. Like I basically doubled down on the complete opposite. I, my reasoning was if I'm going to write a work that speaks out against bigotry or racism, or fascism, I don't care to cater to bigots and racists and fascists in my audience. Like, I'm not writing music for them. So if they don't like it, they can leave, A. And B, it was, in my music history studies, I came to a really strong conclusion that the idea that we should create art that is quote unquote timeless, right? This is sort of a very pervasive attitude, especially in classical music, that music is somehow outside of space and time and context and timeless in some way. And I had come to a strongly held opinion that this is a very recent attitude that has developed, during the late romantic period, and that composers, all of the works that we know and love, actually are completely of their time and of their moment. If they're relevant in the modern world, that's great. They have continuing relevance. But, I don't think Shakespeare, when I was in theater a lot, I was specialized mostly in Shakespeare. I don't think Shakespeare was thinking, in 400 years' time, will this work still be relevant to audiences living in 21st century America? I don't think the piece I love to throw at people when they're like, music shouldn't be political, music should be outside of space and time. I'm always like, what do you think the 1812 overture is about? Like, do, do you think that piece is out? What do you think the Marseillaise in the middle of that means? Like, do you think it's just like a timeless thing that Tchaikovsky threw in there? No, absolutely not. So, I feel very lucky because I first of all, I started writing choral music, and I love writing choral music. I love working with text. I love working with choirs, especially. I think they're, in my experience, the most game, the most generous performers who are willing to try something new, who are hungry for new literature. Thank goodness I didn't sort of set out into the world saying, like, I want to exclusively be an orchestral composer, because I think I would probably still like be bartending or something like that. Um, Not that there's anything wrong with bartending, it's great. So I fell into choral music, and with my sort of portfolio, my rapidly expanding portfolio of political works, I found that people were hungry for music that does comment on what's going on in the world, especially in what has been a fairly tumultuous beginning to this century. The last 25 years or so has felt, to me at least, who was born in 1980, much more tumultuous than the first half of my life. And we want things that help us process that. We want things that comment on what's going on around us. We don't want to ignore. We want our music to live in the world. I I was approached by Cantus to write a piece for an immigration program that they had. And I was thinking about what text to set. And I had found this wonderful poem. I believe the first one I found was the text for the second movement, called N400 An Erasure. You may know this, but I'll just briefly. An erasure poem or erasure poetry is when you take an existing document and black out certain words so that you create an entirely new text from what is left over. This has been used for all sorts of things. You know, I think the very first one I saw was a woman who took a breakup note that her boyfriend had left her and blacked it out to say something quite offensive about her boyfriend, which I was like, you know, that's hysterical. I love this form of poetry. It's almost always, a form of protest against the original text. Like you're not taking the text and amplifying what was there. You're taking the text and using it to say something completely different. The N400 form is the form that you have to fill out when you want to become a citizen. I went through this process in 2007, 2008. And it was a fascinating process for me. I've actually written a couple of things about it if you include this one. Um, because, you know, I came to America, by the way, on one of those, and everyone knows what this is now, on one of those 90-day fiancé visas. I fell in love with an American and we did a long distance thing for a while. And then we realized that the only way for us to be together was to get married. So at the tender age of 23, we got married and it seems to have worked out because we celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary last year. So I guess that was a good choice. I entered this process, and then 5 years in, I became eligible to become a citizen. So I downloaded the appropriate forms and, paid the fees and set about filling out the form. And I remember being a little taken aback by some of the questions on the form. There is a whole, people, Americans, if you're not a natural born American, you don't know this, but there is a whole morality section in the N400 form. There's like a page which is a morality section. And the questions, I mean, I have them memorized because I just remember being like, what? Like I think the first question is, are you or have you ever been a habitual drunkard? Like that's the language, which, part of me is like, define habitual. Just so many questions about how this question ended up in the form and why the US government needs to have an answer to this question in order for me to become an American. I believe that one of the top five questions is, are you or have you ever been a prostitute? Was one of the questions, which is another like eyebrow raising question that is like, well, the answer is no, but also, isn't that legal in some parts of your country? Like, isn't that legal in Nevada outside of Las Vegas City? Like, why do you need to know the answer to this question? I'm very confused by a lot of these questions. Um, but also, I think a lot of, and something that I've, in my work that's examined the process of becoming a citizen, something that Americans may not think about is the fraught emotions that you go through when you become an American citizen. The stress of it is like there's a lot of stress. First of all, it's very expensive, especially if you hire a lawyer, which we didn't. But if you don't hire a lawyer, that means that you have the stress of, understanding all of the legalese and making sure you dot all your I's and cross all of your T's and answer all the questions correctly. And so you don't, get into trouble and have your application rejected or revoked down the line because you messed up. And then there's the interesting, you have to forswear your allegiance to your previous country. You are making this very tangible step toward leaving your old life behind, which is still a part of you and makes you feel all these feelings. I was doing this at the very end of the Bush administration, and there was definitely a part of me that wondered if I was doing the right thing. I think it's pretty obvious where my politics lie, so I'm not going to shy away from them or like, be mealy-mouthed about it, but I my green card interview, the infamous green card interview that you may know from the Gerard Depardieu movie in the 80s, was the day after Bush got elected for a second term. And I very much recall my husband and I driving back from that interview in complete silence, listening to NPR on the way home. And then when the classical program clicked on, I believe the first thing that host Dick Stroza from WITF in Harrisburg played was the Barber Adagio. So I remember just driving home with this like funeral music happening in the car, thinking like, okay, well, this is what I've come into. But, like I said, I really do love this country. And I have chosen to make it my home. I love Americans. I love the culture in this country of speaking your mind and digging into stuff and digging into uncomfortable conversations. I love the landscape. I've been on a huge road trip around the country that hit most of the national parks, and it's like every single one I expected to be jaded, and instead, jaw on the floor, unable to breathe at how beautiful it is. I love the cities, I love the small towns with their quirkiness. So, these are all the thoughts that are swirling around my head. I found this poem by the poet Laurel Chen, who is actually a spoken word poet. So I was hesitant when reaching out to them because I was a little like, I'm never sure if I reach out to a poet and ask them if I can set their work, if they're going to sort of say, I don't know if I want my work to be turned into something new, if they have an idea of their work in their head, and I'm going to turn it into this thing that a bunch of people sing instead of a spoken word piece. But they were really generous and said, absolutely, let's go ahead and do this. I found a second N400 erasure poem from another immigrant, Nina Polari. They have very different moods. They're like very different in context. And then I figured I would try my hand at a third one, because, as I mentioned at the top, this form of poetry tends to take something and stage a protest against it. So, what I see as the emotional journey through this piece is the first one is sort of an expression of grief at what is happening, at choosing to join this country where the country has done terrible things, as have many countries around the world. I'm from Australia, trust me, I understand that ambivalence. The second one, Laurel Chen's, there's a lot of text in it. And so I knew it was going to be the piece that was very driving and very fast. I was thinking of Laurel's spoken word performance as well. And I felt a lot more of this sort of anger at it, but also the way that they excerpt lines that made me very viscerally think of what it's like in that application process. I mean, the sitting around and waiting. The one of the things that people don't know about is once you've submitted an application like this, um, your status as an immigrant becomes pending. And if you leave the country for any reason, while your status is pending, you can completely disrupt your immigration status. This happened after I put in my form when my husband and I got married, and I applied for a green card. The woman at the desk, when I handed in the form in Philadelphia, said to me, "You're not going to Niagara Falls for your honeymoon, are you?" And I was like, "What? What a strange question to be asked by an immigration official." No, and she's like, "Okay, I have to ask everyone this question because we had a couple come in here a few months ago, hand in their form. They went to Niagara Falls for their honeymoon. They stepped over to the Canadian side for like 3 hours. And on their way back in, when they discovered her status was pending, they wouldn't let her back in the country. They threw out her application and she was not allowed to enter American soil for 3 years. So if you can imagine being on your honeymoon, and then being separated from your husband for 3 years because you stepped over a border to look at a waterfall. So she was actually trying to proactively, warn every applicant that came in not to make the same mistake. So there's that. There's a whole lot of waiting around, and there's this bureaucratic nightmare, this monolithic, almost, it's like talking to a Grecian god or something at Olympus. It's like consulting an oracle. You sort of put this out there, and you just have to wait in front of this sort of nameless, faceless block for a letter to spit out the bottom saying you have an interview, or you have to take your citizenship test, or there was something wrong with your application, or there's been an error, or whatever it is. And I heard that so much in Laurel's poem about, rescheduling and finding a time and resubmitting. And oh my gosh, we went through that. But I also wanted the piece to not end on a note of negativity, because in the end, we did decide, we made that choice to become citizens. And there are reasons that we chose to make America our home. So I thought I would take the form and create a poem that is, a an homage, I guess, to the citizens who have gone through this process, who have chosen to go through this and have not given up along the way, and have, not in my case so much, but have gone through trauma and, made decisions, heartbreaking decisions about leaving their homeland for various reasons. And, I really was trying to get this idea of being free from all of that once you become a citizen. Again, knock on wood. But I was very pleased when I got to the final page of the form in my erasure poem and was able to figure out how to get the words, "You will breathe free," into the final line. I was like, yes, this was meant to be. Clearly, they designed the form so that I would create this erasure poem. So, yeah, I created it for Cantus with those three emotions in mind, that emotional journey in mind. I think because of my theater background, I think of all of my text setting as a form of theater. It is about telling a story and taking the audience on a journey. In many ways, even when I'm not working with my own text, I feel like a kind of playwright, as well as a composer. When I do composition workshops for, trainee composers, I will sometimes say, like, people sort of say, what's your text setting process? And I always check, how many theater kids do we have in this audience? And, it's usually more than a few, because we're all in the performing arts together. And I sort of say, for me, setting text uses exactly the same part of my brain and feels like I'm using exactly the same muscle memory as preparing a monologue for an audition, preparing a soliloquy for an audition. You make exactly the same kinds of decisions. You have to figure out who the character is that is speaking. Where are they from? Do they have an accent? What is their background? You decide, what is the emotional journey? Are you going to amplify what's already in the words? Are you going to understate the emotion that's in the words? Are you going to juxtapose an emotion that isn't directly on the page to give the words an added meaning or some kind of subtext or a different kind of context that's going to add layers of meaning to that text? And then even down to the nitty-gritty of, are you going to say this fast? Are you going to say it slow? Are you going to repeat yourself to make it seem more natural or to hammer home a point? Are you going to stop and make everyone think, oh, there's a moment of silence that really emphasizes what's going on in some way? So I honestly do not know how composers who don't have a theater background set text. Like, I genuinely have no idea how they do it. Because for me, it is completely tied in to the work that I did when I was an actor, doing theater. Like that's what it feels like. So I encourage always, performers who are doing my vocal works to think of themselves as actors as well as gorgeous voices. Like, don't feel like you're just amazing a set of vocal cords that is producing the pretty sounds. You have to tell the whole story, I will take a technically imperfect performance where the performers are telling that story every time over a technically perfect performance where they just look like blank slates who are, singing a weird madrigal in church that, a very expressionless kind of way. So yeah, when it came to, I mean, and then Cantus did this incredible performance and absolutely nailed it. And I actually never saw them sing it live. I only got videos out of their performances, which was a little heartbreaking to me. But they made such wonderful videos because have they have like a great budget to do all of that, that I was just thrilled to absolute bits. One thing I will say, which was a fun discovery during when I saw their video for the first time, was in Australia, we say naturalization. Naturalization, we say it with an I instead of naturalization. And I didn't realize that until like it's been 21 years since I've lived in this country, and there are still every now and again words that I don't realize I'm saying slightly differently to the way Americans, like if you held a gun to my head right now, I could not tell you if it's pronounced advertisement or advertisement. I say them both because I'm completely confused as to which one it is. But I remember the first time I heard them saying naturalization, I was like, oh, hmm. I may have said that slightly differently if I were thinking more clearly about how Americans say it. It works. It works totally fine in the context. And they actually said, "Do you want us to sing naturalization?" I'm like, "No, I think it would be weird for Americans to pronounce it the way I do just because." But it was just like a funny shock to me that I was like, oh, right. I still have my enough of my Australian accent that I'm saying that differently. So yeah, then translating that to SATB was, it's always an easier and more difficult process in various ways to when you conceive of something with a certain voicing and then you are changing that voicing up. It's an interesting process as a composer because on one hand, it's like the chords are all there, the harmony is all there, the mood of the work is all there, so that work is done, so that's easier. On the other hand, it's like, I want this to be something that works and not something, not like just shoehorned into another kind of voicing. It is actually, I will say, for those of you who've ever sung in tenor bass choruses, which is not me, um, I went through a learning curve earlier in my choral composing career because I had never sung in a tenor bass chorus. I didn't really understand how they worked at first. And so my very first tenor bass arrangements are garbage. I'm just gonna say it. Like they're awful. I They sound like mud. I had wonderful performers who made them work, but I realized afterward where I was like, oh, I made Chanticleer sound not as good as I know Chanticleer is. That's on me because I needed more instruction on how TTBB voices blend and how to space them. For those who've never sung in TTBB choruses, fun fact, they do a lot more homophony because polyphony can be really difficult when you're down in that register where the harmonics are basically making everything really muddy. It's harder to hear the lines. So actually going from TTBB to SATB can be a little freeing in some ways because you have this super expanded range. You can think about like how to space that out. It's like going from going from a small apartment to a big house with lots of rooms in many respects. And then the challenge becomes how to fill those rooms and make it feel like a home rather than, a dorm house that for college students that don't have enough furniture. So that's the best way I can describe it. Um, I want to mention, so I mentioned that I have a couple of pieces that are sort of about the immigrant experience and my immigrant experience. Actually, shortly after I became a citizen in 2008, just in time to vote for that election. You could probably guess who I voted for. I I wrote a piece called "The Oath of Allegiance." Which is I am pretty sure the most difficult piece in my entire repertoire. I wrote it for Volti over in San Francisco, and they actually asked me for a difficult piece. I mean, I think for them, as a very new music ensemble that likes to do very experimental works, they had seen some of my output and they were like, "We want you to push yourself to write something that is like really out there." So I was like, "All right, well, let me try something with this piece." And it's the text from the Oath of Allegiance, which is the oath you swear when you become a citizen. And one of the reasons that I was grappling with that was I didn't look at the oath until I entered the citizenship process. And I think I know I thought it would be something different. Like when I finally saw the text of the Oath of Allegiance, I was again a little taken aback. I thought it would be a sort of, yes, you would have the legalese of forswearing any previous allegiance to any, it's like prince potentate. Like there's a lot of 19th century words for nation states in there. But I guess I thought there would be, some more stuff about the Constitution or something, just stuff that I really appreciate about America. But actually, the vast majority of that oath is about fighting in wars. Because in some respects, it's a holdover from the Civil War when, like most famously, Irish immigrants were coming to America, and the Union would basically say, you can be an American citizen if you immediately pack off and go fight the Confederate Army, right? So they had this oath in place that was basically, I swear I will go fight in a war if called upon to fight in a war. And if I'm not good for fighting, I swear I will do, non combat related war things. If you ask me to do that, I promise I'll do that. Anything you want, if you want me to do a war, I'm there. Um, and this is, sure. Okay. Yeah, I understand when I'm becoming an American citizen that I'm signing up for a potential, if a draft is implemented or something, I'm going to be on the rolls because I'm a citizen. But that's not the reason I'm becoming a citizen. I guess there was definitely a part of me that's like, okay, this is like an interesting thing. There is, however, a really interesting part of the Oath of Allegiance, which is I I think sort of in recent years, I have been thinking about more and more and more. It's a part of the oath. It's actually shared language between the oath of allegiance and also the oath of office of elected officials, and also the oath of military service for anyone who served in the military. And it's this section that says, I swear to defend the United States and its Constitution and laws against all enemies, foreign and domestic, which is a really important part of that oath, I think. And I have raised this question many times, and I'm always like, I'm going to get in trouble one of these days for raising it, but thinking about like, if I identify an enemy, what is my obligation? What then? Because the oath doesn't go into that. These are the questions that I think about as a citizen. I also think about the fact that, natural born citizens don't have to swear this oath. I take my oaths pretty seriously. If I swear an oath, I'm going to swear it. But yes, it's like everyone who's a civil servant, as Laura in the chat just mentioned, everyone who's in the military, everyone who's an elected official, swears this oath with this language. Um, and I just keep thinking, what do I do? What are the things that I can do? Okay, what do I do? I write music, so that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm attempting to do, I guess. Um, there's the Oath of Allegiance. It rarely gets performed because it really is like it's a humdinger of a piece. It's like terribly difficult. It's not pretty. It's not like a comforting piece at all. I also wrote a piece called American Dreamers back in 2018. There's a group here in Philadelphia called Philharmonia, conducted by Mitus Andaya, who's on faculty at Temple. And she approached me because she wanted to commission a piece thinking about the Dream Act kids, and the path to citizenship, which was being threatened quite concretely at the time by the Trump administration. And I was like, yes, I want to help. What can I do? I was very insistent, though. I'm like, even though I have refugees in my family background, so a little bit about my family, real quick. My mother escaped the Cultural Revolution in China. In 1972, she swam from mainland China to Hong Kong to escape. And the conditions before she escaped, that I have been told about, I'm sure there's a lot that she's left out, but we're talking starvation conditions. She has eaten rats and vermin to survive. She has eaten insects. She has, eaten rotten vegetables that she had to pick up off the city streets, because there was nothing for them, and there was terrible violence. My oldest uncle was assassinated in political wrangling in the Red Guard when he was 19. Just harrowing, harrowing stories of trauma, which she did not pass on to me, because she got to Australia and I had what, by comparison is an incredibly stable, privileged life growing up, where I got to do music and theater, for example. My biological father immigrated to Australia post World War II. He's a little older than my mother. He's from Greece originally. And in World War II, Greece was one of the points of fighting between the Allied and the Axis forces. The infrastructure was just bombed to heck, So there were no economic opportunities, and there was a mass exodus of a lot of Mediterranean people from Greece and Italy, etc., to other countries. America is one example. He chose to go to Australia. My stepdad's parents, my grandparents on my stepdad's side, were quote unquote boat people, they're known as in Australia. Basically, they escaped the Japanese invasion of China during World War II. Which is something I didn't find out about until I was a teenager and interviewed my grandfather for a modern history project and saw my grandfather weeping and telling horrific stories for the first time. Whereas before that, he had just been like my jolly Buddha-like Chinese grandfather. I saw the trauma written on his face for the first time, which was a shell shock of an experience for me to know that they had gone through that and shielded me from it, the two generations down. Um, but the story of coming to America and being an undocumented immigrant is not my story, because I was a 90-day fiance. So, an alien spouse, which is maybe one of my favorite terms that I got to sign off as on my immigration forms, alien spouse. Anyway, so I deliberately set out to find um, people who had come to America as undocumented immigrants for the texts that I set, and to work very closely with them, to ask their permission to split the piece, as far as ownership and payment and all of that kind of thing with the commission with them. And I found this movement called, it's like hashtag undocupoets, on Twitter at the time, rest in peace, Twitter, and was introduced to these incredible people who, some of them who had not gotten, any kind of permanent status yet, but who were saying, you know, they were brave enough to make art about their experience, which could be potentially catastrophic for them if 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 ICE came around and said, well, you've put yourself out there as an undocumented person. Um, some of them, well, all of them had gone through, Dream Act kind of applications. So I also got to learn about some of the things that people who haven't been through that process didn't realize about that, which, for example, you have to continually apply for it. It's not a one and done. You don't just get your Dream Act status and you're done. You have to keep applying for it. I forget if it's every year or every 3 years, but it's very fraught, right? Because if your application gets denied, that's it. You're back to your quote unquote home country, which you may not have visited since you were a baby. Um, and how expensive that is every time as well, because it's like $600 every time to keep reapplying for this status. It's a huge burden on young people, many of whom are just trying to survive. But also, one of the things that I really took to heart was I read an essay by actually a different undocupoet to one of the ones that I was working with that was like railing against privileged liberals sort of using them as avatars of like to assuage their savior complex. You know what I mean? Like not really viewing them as people, but just seeing them as like victims of the system and then telling their story, but it's just this one tiny aspect of their story. And I totally like understand and agree with that. So one of the things that people are often surprised with when they hear that piece, it's like a multi-movement piece, is that there are several movements in there that have absolutely nothing to do with, their negative experiences as immigrants. There's a piece in there which is one of my favorites called More Milk Makes It Better, which tells one of the poets stories of how when she was a kid in the Philippines, she was in a Kraft singles commercial, and then she came to America and there was so much milk and cheese everywhere. She just ate tons of it and gained a bunch of weight, but it was just so good. American milk is just so good. One of my favorite things about that is when it was performed up in Minneapolis, I went up there and there were a bunch of people in the choir from Wisconsin, like cheese country. One of them was like, my parents work at a Kraft singles factory, and this is like, I never expected to be singing these words with serious choir, like this is amazing. Um, but people laugh, people are like, I deliberately made it so that you see that these are just Americans. They're American kids, American young people who by pure happenstance, happen to not have papers required by the government to remain here permanently and without threat of being deported. And this is, the first time in our history that we've had this situation, this sort of, you have to go through all of these steps to remain here. So yeah, I know like at the first performance, people in the audience were really like, oh my God, can we laugh? Like, I didn't know I was coming here to laugh. I'm like, yes, it's deliberately funny. We're singing about milk and cereal and how it's like, what is it? It's like it was the drink of all the gods, Um, so, so, I love telling that rounded story because that's theater to me. It's like you don't care. The way to care about issues to me is to care about people. And you can't care about people unless you are, first of all, engaging your emotions. As, someone who has a PhD, I love stats and figures and information, but I don't think that it changes minds. The things that change minds are stories and emotions and connecting with people. The thing that changed my mother, my Chinese mother, was very pro-Iraq war for a long time. She was, I'm gonna say it, she was like anti-Muslim. She was like bigoted against Muslims. And the thing that changed her mind was her Egyptian next door neighbor and her struck up a friendship and they got on super well. And she came to me one day and was like, I changed my mind. I'm like, why? She's like, because I really like my neighbor. And I was thinking, there's one part of me that's like, that is what changed your mind. You're like, call off the genocide. My neighbor is cool. Like that to me is like almost ridiculous. But on the other hand, I feel like as human beings, that's what we're hardwired to do is to make those human connections. And what I love about choral music in particular is that you can have a stance against an issue and make that stance pretty dang obvious in the text of the piece that you're singing. And, the audience is hearing that text. You're not obscuring it. But you cut through the defenses where if you just said that text out loud, um, and they took it on tour around the country, including to, Baptist churches in the South. And I was very like I was like, uh-oh, what is going to happen when they sing it to these very conservative audiences who've traditionally been anti gay marriage. And they said to me, this piece, first of all, they were like, this piece has created more conversation than any of the other pieces on our program. I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna get like hate mail. They're like, no, 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 you don't understand. Conservative men have approached us after we sang this concert and said, I never thought about this issue in terms of freedom before. I had been thinking of it in terms of morality, and it's making me think. And I'm not saying that they're immediately going out and marching in a pride parade or anything, but like that is a seed that I can live with, that I planted that seed in someone's mind that, you don't have to personally, be super invested, but maybe in a country that like I wouldn't say fetishizes freedom, but that makes it sound flippant, but that values freedom as like the number one aspect of what this country was formed on, that maybe that can be a touchstone that we can hold up and say, okay, let's apply it to this situation where, the state is hurting people and infringing upon their freedom, and we can agree on something in there. And I don't think that those people would have heard that message if I had just said the words in the piece out loud, especially not from me. They would have taken one look at my hair and my funny accent and like dismissed me out of line. But I can do it with choir, you know. And if the choir believes in it too, I can do it with I feel like that is a form of creating that kind of a space where empathy can exist. So that is why I do the things that I do. I like the comment in the chat. When you do gain an understanding of Americans, please clue us in. Yeah, I'm trying, one American at a time in many ways. Miles mentioned the Gonzalez cantata that I wrote very early on. I wrote it when I was an undergrad and it went viral. Um, one of the things that I was trying to do actually when I wrote that piece was understand Alberto Gonzalez because he was such a mystery to me in many ways. Um, as like the first Latino American Attorney General of the United States, absolute whiz kid, like went to Harvard, like came from Mexican laborer parents and then went to Harvard Law School and then like this incredible resume. Um, and then did what he did and got into so much trouble. And I feel like by the end of that, I actually did understand him in this weird way. And the empathy for me came, I'm gonna bring it full circle, right back to this idea of having these working class immigrant parents. When he resigned, he said this incredible thing in his resignation speech. He said, even my worst days as Attorney General have been better than my father's best days. And that line stuck out to me in a huge, it didn't seem to actually like be relevant to anything else he said in his speech, but it was like this shooting like star right into my brain because I realized like my parents trying to make me become a doctor, same deal, right? Like he took this path, his parents and he like pushed to get out of the gutter, so to speak, like to get to the next class. And he didn't sort of get, I don't want to say this way. I feel like I would not be able to compromise who I am in the same sort of way, but he went all in on that dream and ended up like falling into the trap of cozying up to power in such a way that he broke the law. Um, and yeah, let's hope I don't do that. Although if I break a law, I hope it's one that deserves to be broken. Okay, that's my speech. If there are any questions, yeah, let's do some questions. I have time if anyone wants to hang out. Yeah. You can type questions into the chat if I'm seeing them as well, if you don't want to speak out loud. Or, oh, Stephen has a hand up, I see.
Sorry, let me,
I
can you
can hear
hear me?
you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, I have two if that's okay. The first,
Yeah.
you were talking about sort of like preparing choral music like monologues, and I'm wondering, I guess, your process in terms of do you like block it out as if you're actually rehearsing a monologue, or I guess where do you fall on the spectrum of like the Philip Glass sit at a desk for 6 hours a day thing versus the like Britain like take a walk in the woods until it comes to you? I guess like how do you
Oh, it's
think it through?
Britain. It's Britain, except my woods, my back porch here in Philadelphia. My back porch opens out onto I-95. It's how we got our house so cheap. So when I go out on my back porch, there are like, I-95 like Dodge like chargers and trucks like being really loud out there. So I go out onto my back porch and I usually like print out the lyrics onto something I can hold in my hand, like a palm card kind of deal. And I will literally rehearse it like it's a monologue. I will scream and shout and clap my hands and try to find the rhythm and stomp around. And it's great because I-95 is right there. The neighbors can't hear me. I've never had the cops called on me for like making hooting sounds at like 11 p.m. It's great. So I basically just try to find, the meter and the rhythm of the words and how I want these words to go. I usually do start at the beginning and go all the way through to the end when I compose. Um, but yeah, I'm a melodist. I love melody. There are some composition communities where melody is like out of fashion, shall we say, and it's all about texture, but I am 1000% a melodist. It's why so much of my stuff is contrapuntal as well. So I will think like, what does this line, how do these words want to sit in a melody that is saying what I want it to say? And I really do think like melodies and harmonies and rhythms have meanings. They have very specific meanings. So yeah, that's and then I'll run back inside once I've got a melody and put it down on my computer in Sibelius. My rule is if I forget a melody between my back porch and my computer, it wasn't any good. Don't sweat it. Like it clearly wasn't memorable, so try again. And you said you had a second question, Stephen?
Yeah, no, thank you. And that I'm a fan of melodies too, and I think you kind of answered my second question because the
Okay.
second was um how much do you think you write from like the text tells you how it wants to be sung versus you sort of have ideas percolating in your head and eventually you find a text and think like, oh, this would be a good place for the idea.
Yeah, I'm very text first. I very much am like prioritize the text over everything. Sure, there's occasions where I will, yes, I edit text sometimes. If I'm like, how do I say this? When I edit text, like if I cut a text or I'm editing a text to say something, it's generally because the text it says it takes so much longer to sing something than it does to speak something. So you want sentences to be short, otherwise either the singer will run out of breath or you'll forget what the beginning of the sentence was by the time you get to the end. Or alternatively, like sometimes the text says too much. And because, as I said, I strongly believe that melody and harmony and rhythm have meaning, if there's something in the text that I feel like I can express musically, then I don't need that to be overt. So I will, judiciously edit a text to be shorter because I'm like, this doesn't need to say all of that. If that, you don't have to go on and on about being scared if you can make the music make it really plainly obvious that you're scared. You don't have to say that a whole lot. So yeah, very text driven, definitely.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Wendy.
This is not so much a question, but it's a comment. I think the beginning coming into this meeting today, I had the question about the differences in emotions between the three movements, but I think you talked about that a lot. And I just want to say thank you for bringing us home at the end, because I think that's really nice as a singer to have that feeling, okay, we've gone through this emotional journey and this is where we're ending up. So that's really cool. And I just said in the chat, I wish we could just hang out and compare immigration stories, because I remember applying for my green card and just waiting. I've got to get my green card before we go back to the UK to celebrate with my family that I got married. So
Is that where are you from originally?
I'm from the UK.
Where in the
So,
UK?
it's the East Coast, Great Yarmouth.
Great Yarmouth. Okay, yeah.
Maybe you probably haven't heard of it, but it's
No,
okay.
I have heard of it
Yeah.
because I watch way too much British television, and I grew
Uh-huh.
up in Australia. We had tons of British
Oh,
television.
cool.
So, almost every summer, my husband and I go to the UK. Um, this past summer, if I can brag a bit, because it wasn't in the bio at the beginning, the BBC Proms commissioned me to write a piece for the King's Singers and Voces 8. And so I got to go to the UK and have a premiere at Royal Albert Hall, which was maybe one of the most, I still can't process that that happened, that there was the whole of Royal Albert Hall clapping, and it was for me, it just mind blowing. But every time we go, we rent a car, which Londoners think we're absolutely like bananas for doing this, but we rent a car and then we go tootling around the countryside because there is so much to see. What an intensely history dense country the UK is. I've been in love with it since I was a little kid. I'm an Anglophile from way back. So yeah. And of course I didn't even get into like I have this whole other side career as a amateur archaeologist and historian in Philadelphia. Where, yeah, like just this past Friday, I did a whole talk on archaeology at the Museum of the American Revolution here. And the museum that we're opening next year is called the Necessary Museum because necessary is an 18th century term for the toilet. And our archaeology on our block was found in 9 and counting privy pits that we have excavated on our block. You can actually see behind me on these shelves just some of the artifacts that we have excavated from it's totally nuts. If you go to just Google the Bog House podcast, you'll come up with our website and our Instagram that has tons of pictures. But we Bog House like dog house, but with a B. We have to open the museum also. It's necessary because it has taken over our like 1,100-foot apartment to the point where it's a fire hazard, and need we need to put it somewhere where people can see it. But yeah, it also means that next year with the 2026, I'm sure you all realize you're being in DC as well, that it is the 250th anniversary of 1776. We're all gonna have a party about that and also think very strongly about our roots as Americans and as a nation. And I have some really interesting stories to tell there too about like who the people who occupied this land before me were and who they are in that story. So stay tuned.
Great. I think we're over our time. If someone has a short but burning question, how about that? And then we can end.
You can also find me really easily online if you like feel free to friend me on Facebook. If you have questions, you can find me on social media. My email address is public still, so you can find me and ask me a question if you have like something that you didn't want to say in front of the group. I'm happy to answer.
All right. Well, thank you, Melissa. This has been absolutely fascinating and wonderful to hear from you. And we are so grateful that you spent this time with us. This is really illuminating in terms of how we approach this piece, and we'll rehearse it tomorrow night with this in mind. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much. We're basically neighbors, Philly and DC. It's not so far away. So, hopefully I'll find out details. I'm not sure if I can come or not. It depends on my schedule, which is like completely out of control this spring. But if I can come, I will. And if not, if anyone's ever in Philadelphia and wants to look me up and have a coffee, just reach out. I'm happy to chat with I like I said, I love choir. Choir is a community. It's not a genre, it's a community. So thank you
Yeah.
to you all for singing my music. Otherwise, I would just be scribbling in the dark.
Thank you. And of course, you are warmly invited to our concert on May 10th.
May 10th. Okay, I'll check my calendar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Take care, everyone.